Hello again. We're talking about obviously these older theories of personality, and we covered Freud, Sigmund Freud. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what we call neo-Freudian theories. Sigmund Freud set the bar. You've heard that term, and and that has to be lived up to at least back in the early days of this stuff. So we have these people coming on the scene, these new psychologists, and they bring wonderful ideas, but they measured themselves against Freud. Some of them did, and adopted his explanations in the beginning, and we call those neo-Freudian theories, new Freudian theories, or differences, whatever you want to term it, doesn't matter. And this comes from chapters 3 and 4 in your textbook. And I only want to talk about two, and only briefly, because you can go on and on with these people. Let's cover Adler first, Alfred Adler. Actually, Adler's, I think, covered in the textbook. I think his work is discussed after uh, Carl Jung, but I'm going to cover Adler first, and I'll talk about Carl Jung in a minute. So there we go. Alfred Adler, his view of psychology, his theory called individual psychology. Now, think back to Freud. His biggie, the thing that shook the earth, was his idea of this unconscious force, your superego, this unconscious stuff that you're not aware of, but it still is a motivation for behavior, i.e., your personality. Adler didn't believe that. He did in the beginning, but he broke away from this and established his own ideas called individual psychology, so that there are no unconscious forces. Your motivation comes from goals in life. And what are those goals? Obtain security and overcome inferiority. Now, there's a question about this inferiority stuff. Are we talking about an inferiority complex, or what are we talking about? Well, the answer is it's an inferiority complex. And his explanation is that most people have an inferiority complex due to experiencing helplessness in infancy. We all are helpless when we're infants. Adler says, but yes, that's natural, but here's the downside of it. So we try to overcome that. And he names two ways, a negative approach and a positive approach, as to your behaviors to overcome this inferiority complex thing. Very questionable. Nonetheless, here's what he said. Children, once they reach the age of early childhood and then beyond, they may try to be dominant and aggressive around their peers and around others for that matter. So they're argumentative. So this dominance and aggressiveness, negative approach. And this carries over into school and then beyond in a lot of cases. His other answer to it is a positive approach. And some people in modern day thinking think this is a little bit of a stretch. They may, as a child, think of this. They may try to exploit their full potential and creativity. I taught young children, and I didn't really see too much of that. Maybe occasionally there would be some child who was a little ahead of everyone else, but nonetheless, that's Adler's, that's his theory, and he introduced into that what he called a holistic psychology component. Behavior being goal directed, and then unity of behavior. What does that mean? It means that you're putting all the pieces of the puzzle together to achieve one goal. And goals are short term, long term, and then there are various points in between. So he says that goals are a very important part of motivation. You accomplish goals in the short term, which lead to long term goals, and then you have all these things going on in between. And that's really a synopsis of Adler. I want to talk about Carl Jung a little bit longer because he was he was a student of Freud, and they were close friends. And Freud, at one point, even considered him almost a son. And they grew apart. Jung became a little um, disconcerted, I suppose is a way to put it. Um, when he began to think about this business of Freud's Oedipus complex explanation of behavior and personality. And Jung was not too enamored with that. In the beginning, he was, but his own background uh, really drew him away from that. And the explanation of certain things, like libido, for example, uh, Jung didn't agree with that important aspect of Freud's work. Uh, Jung did regard the psyche, as did Freud and Erickson, for that matter, as being made up of a number of separate but interacting systems. And then his explanation: ego, personal conscious, personal unconscious, and collective unconscious. The ego, according to Jung, represents the conscious mind because it comprises your thoughts, your memories, your emotions, and the things that you're aware of. And your ego is largely responsible for your identity and your feelings of identity and the continuity of that. And then he originally emphasized unconsciousness in relation to personality, but he changed the meaning of that. And this was a break away from Freud. He proposed that the unconscious consisted of two layers. The first layer he called the personal unconscious. That's the same as Freud's version of unconscious. He didn't call it a superego, but he said there was a power there that was a morality power, and it contains temporarily forgotten information and repressed memories. So that goes really along with Freudian thinking. But here's where he made the break. The unconscious, collective unconscious, that is, which was strictly Jungian. And that was probably, if not the most important difference, it was one of them. Many people think it's the most important. So Jung's description of that, the collective unconscious, sometimes called the transpersonal unconscious, it's controversial at best, but it says that it's a universal version of the personal unconscious. It contains mental patterns, memory traces, if you want to call them that, and you share those with other members of the human species. There are even some that say he described it as this universality of passing down through the centuries from one humanity version to the next, whatever you use the term that you would like to use. So in essence, it's ancestral memory. And Jung coined that archetypes, archetypes. And they're just themes. They're universal themes that are culturally exposed, if that makes sense. And they're expressed through things like literature, art, and of all things, dreams. So that kind of gives you a broad look at Jung. There's a lot more information in your text. You'll read about the persona, the anima, the animus, the shadow, the self. Very interesting description of basically who you are. Shadow is a part of you don't want anybody really to know about. The persona is who you represent to other people, and the self is who you really are. but we'll talk some about that in class. Okay, so that's all I wanted to cover with these two fellows. Read about it, and I'll be back with you pretty soon.